In a small town that clung to the edge of an ancient forest, there lived a young woman named Emily. She had recently moved to the town for a fresh start, renting a quaint cottage that overlooked the dense, dark woods. Emily loved the isolation. It gave her time to work on her novel and connect with nature. However, she soon discovered that her new home held secrets darker than the shadows that danced between the twisted trees. The first few weeks were peaceful. Emily spent her days writing and exploring the forest. She was particularly drawn to an old, gnarled tree in the heart of the woods. It stood taller than the others, its limbs sprawling wildly as if reaching for something unseen. Locals avoided the area, muttering about bad spirits and curses, but Emily found it intriguing. One evening, while walking near the tree, Emily found an old, leather-bound book half buried under fallen leaves. It was worn and the cover was cracked, but the pages inside were filled with entries dating back over 100 years. The entries were written by different people, all previous residents of her cottage. As Emily read, a chilling pattern emerged. Each writer described strange occurrences, whispers at night, figures seen from the corner of the eye, and unsettling dreams involving the old tree. Determined to delve deeper, Emily decided to document her findings in a series of videos, hoping to share her experiences and perhaps understand the phenomenon. Night after night, she recounted her days and the eerie events that seemed to escalate with each passing week. Her viewership grew, with people captivated by the unfolding mystery. One night, while recording, Emily heard whispers outside her window. Grabbing her camera, she went to investigate, the cold air biting at her skin as she stepped outside. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the forest in oppressive darkness. The whispers grew louder, guiding her toward the old tree. As she approached, the air around her grew unnaturally cold, and the ground felt alive under her feet, as if breathing. Reaching the tree, she noticed something she hadn't before, an old, rusted door embedded at the base of the trunk. Curiosity overcoming her fear, Emily pulled at the handle. With a creak that echoed through the silent woods, the door opened, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. With only her camera light to guide her, Emily descended. The walls were damp and the air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. At the bottom, she found herself in a small, cave-like room. The walls were lined with more old books, dusty and cobwebbed. In the center of the room, a stone pedestal held a single, large book, much like the one she had found in the woods. Opening the book, Emily discovered it was a diary belonging to the original owner of her cottage, a man named Jonathan Miller, who had lived there in the late 1800s. His entries detailed the construction of the cottage and his growing obsession with the old tree. He wrote of discovering the door and the room, believing it to be a sacred place that held the power to grant immortality. As Emily read, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the very walls of the room. She turned her camera to record the strange sounds, her hands shaking. That's when she saw it, a shadowy figure in the corner of the room, barely visible on her camera's display. Heart pounding, Emily raised her eyes from the camera to the corner, but there was nothing there. When she looked back at the display, the figure was closer, its features more defined. It was a man, or what was once a man, his eyes hollow, his expression twisted in anguish. Frozen in fear, Emily could only watch as the figure reached out toward her, its hand passing through the camera and touching the screen. The device flickered violently, and then the screen went black. In the darkness, the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. Emily screamed, the sound swallowed by the shadows. The camera, now dead, dropped from her limp hand to the ground. The screen, though no longer recording, flickered once more, showing a final glimpse of Emily, her face contorted in terror, before it went completely dark. Back in the town, her viewers waited anxiously for the next video, unaware of the fate that had befallen her. The forest edge remained silent, the cottage empty, as if Emily had never been there at all. But the whispers continued, a call to the next curious soul daring enough to uncover the secrets of the old tree and the ancient door beneath it. The story was far from over, and the forest awaited. Several days passed with no new videos from Emily. Concern among her viewers grew, sparking debates and theories on her last known whereabouts. A local viewer, named Mark, decided to investigate. Having watched all of Emily's uploads and feeling a connection through their shared curiosity, he felt compelled to visit her cottage and the forest she had documented so vividly. Mark arrived at the cottage on a dreary, overcast day. The building seemed untouched since Emily's disappearance, with her belongings still inside, as if she had just stepped out for a moment. An uneasiness settled over him as he called out for her, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. Finding no sign of Emily inside, Mark turned his attention to the forest. The forest was as silent as it was dark, the thick canopy blocking most of the light. Mark's footsteps sounded unnaturally loud against the soft forest floor as he made his way to the old tree Emily had described. The whispers began almost immediately, soft murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He felt eyes upon him, watching, waiting, but whenever he turned, nothing was there. When Mark found the tree, the rusted door at its base was ajar, as if inviting him in. A cold breeze emanated from within, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Mark hesitated, the memory of Emily's last video playing in his mind. But his desire to find out what had happened to her, to perhaps help her if he could, drove him forward. Descending the staircase, Mark's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the same damp, cave-like room that Emily had described. The room was unchanged, the books still lying scattered, and the large diary on the pedestal. He approached the diary, his hands trembling as he opened it to the last entry Emily might have read. The words blurred before his eyes, not from the poor lighting, but from an intense sense of dread that filled the room. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if urging him to read, to understand, to join in some unfathomable pact. Mark fought against the urge to flee, grounding himself with the thought of finding Emily and uncovering the truth. He read about rituals and sacrifices, about a belief that the tree and the room were part of an ancient, forgotten gateway that connected our world with something darker, something older than time itself. Jonathan Miller's last entries were frantic, filled with ramblings about immortality and a rising darkness that could only be quelled by a new keeper. As Mark absorbed the chilling entries, he became aware of a presence in the room. Turning slowly, he saw the shadowy figure that Emily had described, its outline more defined now, almost solid. It stood between him and the staircase, its hollow eyes seeming to peer into his very soul. Mark spoke, his voice cracking with fear. "What happened to Emily?" The figure remained silent, but its gaze shifted toward the pedestal. Following its gaze, Mark noticed a new entry in the diary, one in Emily's handwriting. It was short, a hurried scribble: "They want a keeper. The cycle must continue or it will escape. I'm sorry." Realizing the gravity of the situation, Mark felt a rush of horror. Emily had been chosen, or had sacrificed herself, to prevent whatever lay beyond the gateway from entering their world. The figure seemed to be a guardian of sorts, ensuring the pact was honored. Mark knew he had to leave, to escape before he too was drawn into the role of keeper. But as he turned to run, the ground shook violently, sending a cascade of books and debris blocking the staircase. The whispers turned into howls, the air around him thickening with oppressive, dark energy. Trapped and desperate, Mark turned back to the diary, searching for a clue, any solution that might reverse what had been set into motion. The figure watched silently, its presence a constant reminder of the potential fate that awaited him. As he frantically read through the pages, the whispers in the room began to articulate into coherent voices, calling out in ancient tongues, pleading, threatening. The boundary between worlds was weakening, the keeper's absence allowing the darkness to seep through. Mark's last hope lay in the cryptic rituals described by Jonathan Miller, possibly to seal the gateway or to appease the entities enough to allow his escape. His hands set to work, drawing symbols and uttering chants that felt alien to his tongue. Outside, the sky darkened further as if reacting to the unfolding events beneath the tree. The fabric of reality in that small, hidden room was thinning, drawing Mark deeper into a world of shadows and whispers. As he continued the ritual, his mind teetered on the brink of madness, the horror of his situation intertwining with his determination to survive and to prevent the darkness from engulfing his world. The voices crescendoed, the ground trembled, and the figure moved closer, its form blurring between that of a wraith's next visitor. And a man tortured by an eternal, otherworldly duty. As Mark chanted the last of the incantations, his voice hoarse with fear, the atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. The air grew colder, and a thin mist began to rise from the ground, enveloping the room in a spectral fog. The shadowy figure's whispers became clearer, a mix of entreaty and command. "Complete the circle, bind the gate," it intoned, each word echoing off the stone walls with the weight of centuries. Mark, understanding now that he was not just fighting for his own life but possibly for the very fabric of reality, continued his work with renewed urgency. On the floor, he drew the last of the symbols Jonathan Miller had described, his fingers trembling as they traced the cold, damp stone. As he finished, the ground beneath him vibrated, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth. The tree above, its roots entwined with the structure of the hidden chamber, groaned as if in pain, the sound terrifying in its intensity. The figure watched, its eyes now glowing faintly, casting a sickly green light in the mist-filled room. Mark could feel its gaze penetrating him, assessing his worthiness, his ability to endure what was to come. Suddenly, the chamber was filled with voices, not just the whispers and moans of the shadowy figure, but other voices, ancient and powerful, speaking in a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm Mark's senses. They spoke of gateways and guardians, of sacrifices made and sacrifices required. "The keeper is bound to the gate, as the gate is bound to the keeper," the voices intoned in unison, a mantra that seemed to reverberate through Mark's very soul. Mark felt a pull, a literal drawing of his essence towards the pedestal where the diary lay open. As he resisted, he noticed the diary's pages flipping rapidly, as if blown by a fierce wind, stopping on a page that detailed a final, desperate ritual, one that Jonathan Miller had never completed, perhaps could never complete. This ritual called for a binding of the keeper to the gate, a fusion of spirit and flesh that would forever close the doorway between worlds. But the cost was clear: the keeper would never return, would become part of the gate itself, a guardian for all eternity. Mark's heart raced as he considered his options. He could complete the ritual, sacrificing himself to ensure the gate remained sealed, or he could attempt to flee, to find another way, risking the possibility that the gate might open wider, unleashing untold horrors upon the world. As he deliberated, the room shook again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the stone walls, and the light from the figure's eyes grew brighter, more insistent. The voices crescendoed, their words a garbled mess of ancient languages, their urgency palpable. Faced with an impossible choice, Mark knew he had little time to act. The world above seemed distant now, a memory of light and life that was fading fast. Below, the gate pulsed with a dark energy, its call nearly irresistible. With a final look at the shadowy figure, Mark made his decision. His voice a mix of defiance and resignation, he began the final incantation, the words foreign yet somehow familiar, as if he had known them all his life. As he spoke, the symbols on the floor glowed, a bright, searing light that filled the room. The mist thickened, swirling around him, and the voices fell silent, listening. The figure stepped forward, its form stabilizing into that of a man, ancient and sad. "You understand the cost?" it asked, its voice no longer a whisper but clear and resonant. "I do," Mark replied, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. The ritual continued, each word tightening the bond between Mark and the gate, between his world and the darkness beyond. The tree above writhed, its limbs contorting as if in agony, the gateway reacting to the sealing of its fate. As the incantation neared its end, Mark felt himself fading, his physical form dissolving as his spirit entwined with the fabric of the gate. The last thing he saw was the figure nodding, a gesture of respect or perhaps gratitude, as the chamber faded from view and the darkness enveloped him. Above, the forest fell silent, the wind stilling, the earth settling. The gate was sealed, the keeper bound. But for how long? And at what cost? The story was far from over, the shadows lingered, waiting for the next chapter to unfold, for the next curious soul to wander into the depths of the ancient forest. As the forest settled into an ominous calm, the darkness that had briefly stirred beneath the old tree receded, its whispers silenced. Yet, the small town adjacent to the woods remained unaware of the narrow escape they had just experienced. The gate was sealed, but the story of the gatekeeper would soon become a legend whispered among the locals, a tale shrouded in mystery and fear. Several months passed, and the disappearance of Emily and Mark became a cold case, the leads exhausted, the investigation at a standstill. The cottage by the forest stood empty, a silent sentinel harboring the secrets of its past occupants. It was during this time that Anna, a young graduate student specializing in folklore and mythology, arrived in town. Drawn by the legends surrounding the old tree and the recent, mysterious disappearances, she hoped to uncover material for her thesis. Anna was particularly interested in the role of gatekeepers in folklore, a figure that appears in various cultures as a guardian of the threshold between worlds. Anna rented the same cottage once occupied by Emily and, before her, Mark. She was unaware of its history, only that it was available and conveniently located for her research. Her first few days were spent poring over local archives and interviewing townsfolk, gathering bits and pieces of stories about the forest and its eerie reputation. Intrigued by the consistency of the tales, Anna ventured into the forest. She felt an inexplicable pull towards the old tree, its gnarled limbs casting eerie shadows that danced in the faint light. When she discovered the rusted door at the base of the tree, her academic curiosity turned into a palpable excitement. The door was slightly ajar, just as Mark had found it months before. Feeling a mix of trepidation and thrill, Anna descended the staircase leading down into the darkness. The air was cool and musty, filled with the smell of damp earth and old wood. She noticed immediately the room was different. The books that once lined the walls were now neatly arranged on shelves, and the large diary on the pedestal was closed, its cover dusty. Anna began her examination by opening the diary. The pages were filled with entries from various individuals over the centuries, chronicling their experiences with the gate and the forest. The most recent entries were from Emily and Mark, their accounts detailed and filled with a palpable fear. Anna read with growing horror about the rituals,